get back to our guest Kimberly Barry and talk about mental health issues and stigma and being unnormal. How did you come up with the name Being Unnormal?
Well, it really came from my own personal experience. And, when my daughter was in psychiatric crisis, part of sitting down and crafting a treatment plan and, kind of figuring out, what that was going to look like, or how we were going to understand if we've hit, some of the benchmarks in our treatment plan. And it was this kind of idea of, well, I just want things to go back to normal, what they were before the crisis. And what I didn't understand at the time is that there was no more normal like life previously was. Things had forever changed. And so when I was thinking about the name, it was really this, acceptance and embracing of my unnormal, and really leaning into mental health not being a death sentence, but just the next phase of our life. And embracing that, because really, what is normal, right? Normal, this idea of normalcy, the fallacy of our normalcy is that there's some kind of normal we're all supposed to be. And the more that I talk to people, the more I live my own life, the more conversations I have, nobody has lived this normal life. So it's like chasing perfection. It doesn't exist. And so it was really about fighting stigma and understanding that actually, if we look at the statistics, right, more of us probably have a mental health diagnosis than not. So that actually would be normal. So embrace your unnormal, embrace the differences, the uniquenesses that create all of us. And and fight any notion of stigma, judgment, all that good stuff. So yeah, that was the impetus of like really kind of reclaiming my own empowerment back, of saying, well, I'm going to be unnormal.
Mhm. I think it's a great approach. Stigma has just hurt so many people. And what's really interesting also is during COVID, we're moving away from the words mental illness to mental health. That really is a shift. We weren't talking about mental health even 2 or 3 years ago. It was all mental illness. We were struggling. The Dr. Joe Show has been struggling against stigma since we began. I mean, that's part of our mission, is to remind people we're all doing the best we can. Can we ask what happened? I mean, how did you get involved with your daughter? What was the situation? Whatever you feel comfortable telling us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to kind of circle back to what you were saying, at least for me, I've always been aware of mental health and mental illness, and I think, there are actually divisions within the mental health community about the framing of mental health versus mental illness versus SMI. And, that was kind of an interesting thing that I stepped in when I created Being Unnormal 3 years ago, was, how do people view even these different terminologies? And what I've come to find is that mental health tends to be kind of the more wellness based, I would say, treatable, kind of I would say easily treatable. When you look at how people look at mental health, depression, anxiety, it doesn't seem to have the seriousness that like schizophrenia, bipolar, narcissism, all that stuff on that spectrum. And so it kind of feels like a spectrum where you're kind of mental health, like, you've only got 5 to 10 pounds to lose, versus like SMI where you've got 100 pounds plus, right? And everything in that spectrum. To me, mental health is a spectrum, and every diagnosis has a spectrum. And not that, we have to pathologize everything, but I think, the right diagnosis can lead to the right treatment. And for families like me that have struggled to get the right diagnosis and the right treatment, those things tend to really matter. As long as the parents and the team isn't framing this as something horrible. If I was to tell a child they have diabetes, they would figure out how to manage that. If you tell a child they have bipolar, the family falls apart and feels like, they've been handed this this, 50-pound weight that they have to slug around for the rest of their lives. And that's not necessarily true either. So, throughout my whole lifetime, right, I grew up in a home where I had addicted parents. I got like, I aced my aces. Like I always joke around, I'm like, I got an A+ on
Nice,
my aces, and
nice.
like just the whole nine. And so, mental health and addiction have always been very topical and front of mind for me throughout my entire, lifespan. And but really being a normal, the impetus was going through the psychiatric crisis with my then 13-year-old daughter, and understanding, she has bipolar disorder, and she was diagnosed very young, because it was very apparent something was not, um, was and I don't want to say was not right because she's wrong, but there was something that wasn't right. As a parent, I was able to see that these behaviors were extreme and very erratic, and there was something a little bit edgier to what was happening. And we got the bipolar diagnosis at the age of 7 after her being in therapy for 2 years. So at the age of 5, she had written a suicide note and given it to me, that she was going to jump off the top of her bunk bed to kill herself. And of course, as a parent, I'm gutted. This is my child. She's in kindergarten. Like, what? And you're just not prepared as a parent, for these moments, because nobody tells you that there are possibilities that these moments could happen. And that goes to the stigma that we don't have open dialogue, especially as parents, and especially as mothers. We talk about what to expect when you're expecting, and oh, it's going to be great, and you're going to raise a child, and you're going to watch them flourish, and you're going to teach them how to fish and swim and do all the stuff. But what happens if you have a child who doesn't fit that criteria? So, I felt, even in that moment, very isolated and alone, and I certainly wasn't going to talk to any of my friends about it. And unfortunately, at the same time, I was losing my ex-husband to his mental illness, and so I was still married. And because of the crisis that he then inadvertently, um, kind of it fell into, I guess, for lack of a better term, um, there wasn't a lot of support there or understanding. So I really did feel alone. But I had the wherewithal of somebody who had been in therapy for, a good portion of my life. I'm a card carrying member, a diamond member of therapy. And so I knew that I needed to get help. And so I was able to get her into therapy. And thank goodness for play therapists, first and foremost, for people that take the time to work with young children. There are not many of them, and God bless the ones that are out there. So I was able to get her into therapy, and we watched and monitored, and I logged, and I, everything, how much sleep, what were they eating, where were the mood shifts. So I gathered 2 years of data, and finally, after 2 years, we had enough information to make a diagnosis that was well vetted, and we were able to medicate. And I'll never forget, because I had to teach my 7-year-old at that time how to swallow a pill. I mean, and it's these little things that, parents don't talk about, like, well, how do you teach your kid to swallow a pill, especially at the age of 7? But she was given, a medication, and I got an email from her teacher 3 days after she started her meds, and she goes, Kimberly, I don't know how to frame this email. She goes, but I just wanted to say, I don't know if something has changed with your daughter, but it's almost like she's a different person. She's really engaging, and she's not as irritable, and it seems like she can do her schoolwork. And that was such validation that I had made that right choice, because as a parent, you're struggling, you know, should I be putting my child on medication? What does that mean for me as a parent? All of that stuff. So this journey with my daughter was, it's a very long journey. And she had hit another pretty solid depressive cycle when she was 10 and a half. And I, but she's been in, I keep my kids in therapy. And we went to her therapist, and the therapist said, okay, well, let's go talk to the psych nurse. Go talk to the psych nurse. Psych nurse says, let's put her on an SSRI. And we did. And within 2.5 weeks, she was completely suicidal. And it was just crash and burn. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that, sometimes SSRI medications can interact with people who have bipolar. It can cause high suicidality. All I knew is I had a 10-year-old child all of a sudden that was trying to kill herself, and I was bewildered. Then I jumped in and started doing my homework and learned and had those conversations and said, I think this is what was going on. Can we pull her off this medication? We did, and the suicidality, subsided. And again, going through that by myself, I was so scared. Not only was I not going to let my friends know what was going on, but how much do I divulge to the school? Will she be, marked? Will she kind of have that scarlet letter? How much do I divulge uh, to anybody that needed that information? It was really, really tough. So I just kind of tucked it under my hat, and I put out the information because I didn't want her to be stigmatized. I didn't want her to be that kid. I didn't want her to be, oh, we're not having play dates with her, there's something wrong with her. And so I just tucked it in and internalized it and kept trucking. And then she had a long period stretch of stability. And then at 13, we actually got influenza. It was the impetus. I got influenza. I will never forget. It was February 15th, 2016. I got struck with the flu, true influenza, and I was down. And I'm asthmatic. I get pneumonia. That's why COVID for me was very serious. I took it very seriously. I knew it was a true threat to my life. And so I got influenza and I was down, and they actually wanted to hospitalize me at the time, but I'm a single mom with 2 kids. I wasn't going anywhere. I'm like, well, we'll figure this out from my couch. And lo and behold, we go. And of course, my daughter got sick, and she got sick and she really struggled to breathe. But something happened, and I still probably medically couldn't explain it, but it was like something just clicked. And all of a sudden she started having massive anxiety like she had never had, and she couldn't breathe. Like her respiratory rate was so high they hospitalized her. And we ran the tests, we look at her heart, everything. And they came back and they said, this is anxiety. And I'm thinking, how, as an asthmatic, how is this anxiety? Even I was like, what? And I had to process that as a parent, going, okay, my child can't breathe. She's I mean, literally all day and all night. And it was anxiety. And so that kicked off this highway to hell, for lack of a better term, where the anxiety morphed into suicidality. She started rapid cycling. She would be crying and sobbing one minute, and then the next minute punching holes through walls and throwing things. And so we had all this, and I mean, it was just life altering. And at the time I ended up getting laid off because I had to be there to watch her 24/7. She was under suicide watch. We were trying to get her help. We were trying to figure out, okay, is this medication changes? What's going on? But I will never forget, as a parent, she woke me up at 1 o'clock in the morning, so I'm finally sleeping, because I was not sleeping because I was up with her. I finally was getting a little bit of sleep, and she woke me up, and it was 1 in the morning, and she said, Mom, I just want to die. Mom, please, I just want to die. And I opened my eyes, and she was just sobbing and just asking for me to just let her die. And as a parent, as a human, but as a parent, and it being your child, I don't think I will ever experience a deeper level of fear than I had at that moment. I was terrified, terrified. Who do you call and talk to about this? Who's talking about this? Does this happen to other people? Is this only me? Did I do something wrong as a parent? Did I screw up my child? Everything flashes through your head. And that night I didn't get a wink of sleep because I was so afraid if I went to sleep, she might find something to hurt herself with. And we wrote it out. And, she she struggled for 6 months, just vacillating through aggression, um, everything. And then the shame that came along with the realization of what she would be doing in these rage moments when she would calm down. It just was a living nightmare for her, going through this, not being able to control it. And for a parent to watch your child feel that way, and also then, though, process being the recipient of that. And finally, we were able to get her into the right level of care. And we finally dialed in her meds. And once we dialed in her meds, it changed her life. It changed our lives, my life, her sister's life, her life. And she was able finally to stabilize. Um, but it was a rocky road. I had to fight the education systems because they wanted to boot her out of the district because she wasn't a butt in the seat. It was expensive to educate her because she was not in school. And, I had to fight with her pediatric care provider to, make the referrals. I had to go through the various agencies and, trying to get whatever level of care I could at the time. Um, it is a slow process, but when you're in it, every minute feels like a year. And I think maybe the pandemic can, with everybody kind of starting to go through something where you're in a situation where you're stuck in your house and you have no control over it, that was that. Except there was also at the time a tornado in my house damaging property and breaking my heart simultaneously. And and so coming out of that, I said, by God, you know this can't just be me. I know there's got to be other families out there. I was trying to find communities, I was trying to find vetted information. And I got to a point, I'm like, if you shove, if you tell me that, it's just going to be a paleo diet that's going to fix this, or, essential oils is just going to fix this, or, whatever, just take this vitamin one more time, I'm going to scream. I want real information. I want to understand what's happening in my daughter's brain. I want to understand why she's, like you said, doing what she's doing, because I can't be an effective parent and I can't provide helpful interventions to her without that information. I want to be a part of the solution for my daughter. And so going through that and feeling so alone, I decided to say, you know what? If I get through this, I've got to do something about this. And that's really where being UnNormal, you know, arose from, where we got through to the other side. And I went, okay, I've got to get I've got to get going. We've got to not only break stigma, we've got to get great information out there, and we've got to empower people to be able to have more agency over their care and not feel like they are screw ups, losers, rejects, not feel like they have the bad kid or they are the bad kid, not feel like they're the worst parent in the world or the worst partner, wife, spouse, brother, sister. For us as the caregivers and the loved ones, we can do better when we know better. And for the people that are struggling with the diagnosis, for them to know, like, look, yes, your brain, there's some stuff going on in your brain, but you also are incredibly empowered to manage your treatment and symptoms and take control of your life too. So that's pretty much that in a nutshell.
It's a powerful story. Mark, you were absolutely rapt, I saw, and you too, Tom, riveted by the story.
Well, you can only picture yourself in her story, right? I mean, it's you listen and you empathize but you're right. There's got to be other families going through what you're going through, and I applaud you for following through with your Lord. If you get me through this, I will do this. And God bless you for doing that. And I support you 1,000%.
Well, thank you. Right. When you're angry enough, you get fired enough to lean into your purpose. And that's, pretty much where I went.
Do you feel as though COVID is really opening up the doors for these conversations now?
I'm hopeful. I think the short answer is yes. However, my concern is as things kind of quote unquote go back to normal, right? People will forget, right? That all of a sudden we're going to have massive amnesia about things because we just want to forget and run away. And I think it's going to be that same behavior. It's the same behavior that fuels stigma, the denial, the avoidance, that could potentially, right, kill some of those conversations that are really, really needed. So I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that if we are maybe loud enough, um, they have to hear us, right? And I think if we can really reduce shame and open conversations from that non-judgmental place, you know, it could then maybe be some of the impetuses for change that we need in the systems down to our communities. When my daughter was in crisis, I had community members straight up to my face tell me that I was not doing the right thing. My friends didn't understand what was going on, and I would constantly hear things. Why isn't your daughter back in school? Why can't you just get her on the bus? Why haven't they been able to put her on the right medication? Why is treatment taking so long? And it's an ignorance, and not in a bad way. It's just from the lack of lived experience. You have no idea what that's like until you go through it, and you see how it's not easy just to get a therapist. You just can't roll in and in a month be fixed. That's not how this works. And I think now, due to, at least especially in my area, the shortage of mental health practitioners, my community, for maybe the first time, their privilege is being tested, and they're starting to understand that they had a lot of assumptions that were inaccurate, and now they're being affected by it because they just can't get their kid into a therapist. There's waiting lists. And so it's easy to say, why can't you just, when it doesn't apply to you? But now, since it is applying to them, I'm hoping that that we can take a step back collectively and say, okay, now do you understand? And if you understand, maybe we can work together on building some solutions.
It's very easy to solve problems when they're only theoretical to you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I knew how to be the perfect parent when I was pregnant. I will tell you that. Oh yeah, flaxseed muffins for everybody. Yep, yeah, absolutely, right? But it's super true. It's super true. And so, I get asked a lot. I'm really plugged into my community here. And so I'm often getting messages, Kimberly, where can I find a therapist? Kimberly, my kid is suicidal. Kimberly, I'm seeing a huge uptick in eating disorders here locally. Actually, throughout the US on the rise. And it didn't surprise me. I said, well, eating disorders, lack of control. Oh, how can I control what's going on during a global pandemic? Well, I can control what goes in my mouth. Makes sense to me, and that's the thing is, I think for me, a lot of this made sense because a lot of people didn't see what was already there on the brink before we went into the pandemic. These things aren't new. They were there. They've always been there. It just now is affecting you. It's at your door.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think COVID has certainly exposed a lot of things that have been there all along.
Yes, absolutely.
But one of the things that has also been here all along is our sponsors. So we're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show and Kimberly Berry.
Stretch the